Imagine journeying through the annals of history, peering back into times long gone and stumbling upon peculiar tales that make you scratch your head in wonder. Here, nestled within the tapestry of the past, are 12 such curious incidents that might just leave you bemused. Full teeth removal used to be a wonderful wedding gift. A trip to the dentist nowadays might not be everyone's favorite, and getting a tooth pulled can be as uncomfortable as, well, getting a tooth pulled. But compared to the past, today's dental visits are much better. Take 19th century England, for example. Back then, keeping teeth clean was tough, and many people had tooth problems early on. When a tooth went bad, folks had to go to the local barber surgeon, who pulled it out using pliers, and there was no numbing medicine. To save their kids from going through that painful experience multiple times, some parents chose a radical solution: full teeth removal as a special gift when their children grew up. This meant exactly what it sounds like: pulling out all the teeth and replacing them with dentures. Surprisingly, this extreme gift was so appreciated that it was often given to brides as a wedding present. The German polar bear craze. Over the last 30 years, a French woman named Jean-Marie Donat collected over 10,000 old photos from the 1920s and 1930s in Germany. Surprisingly, many of these pictures featured people, including Nazis, posing with guys dressed as polar bears. The polar bear craze in Germany started in the early 1920s when the Berlin Zoo got 2 polar bear cubs. People loved them so much that it sparked a trend, lots of folks dressing up as polar bears. This polar bear thing wasn't just a short-lived trend, it lasted for decades. Through big changes, like the Weimar Republic falling apart, the Nazis taking over, the horrors of the Third Reich, World War II happening, and Germany being occupied, Germans kept taking pictures with polar bears. The craze only faded away in the late 1940s. Ivy League universities used to take nude photos of their students. Back in the late 1970s, a Yale University staff member opened a long-forgotten room and found something quite surprising inside. Loads and loads of pictures featuring young men without any clothes on, showing everything. Strangely enough, these naked men had sharp metal pins sticking out of their spines. Now you might think it's some weird BDSM voodoo stuff, but it's not as scandalous as that. From the 1940s to the 1970s, Yale and some other fancy schools like Harvard, Vassar and Brown had a strange tradition. They made their first-year students pose without clothes for a special photo shoot. Why? Well, it was for a big study about a disease called rickets. To study it, they had to attach pins to the backs of the students, both guys and girls. Believe it or not, famous people like George W. Bush, Hillary Clinton, Diane Sawyer and Meryl Streep have these old naked photos from their time at Ivy League schools. The photos were supposed to be destroyed when people found out, and the study got criticized. But who knows, there might still be some floating around, possibly even on the internet one day. The Great French Mustache Strike. When people think about Frenchmen in the 19th and early 20th centuries, a common image is someone with a mustache. However, there was a group of Frenchmen during that time who actually went without mustaches: domestic servants and waiters. The upper classes and wealthy folks in France wanted to set these workers apart, so they made a strange rule. If you worked as a servant or waiter, you couldn't have a mustache. A newspaper at that time even called it a sentence to forced shaving. The guys without mustaches didn't like being treated that way, so being French, they did something about it. They went on strike. In 1907, fancy waiters in Paris and all across France went on strike. They wanted better pay, fewer hours at work, and the right to grow a moustache, just like other Frenchmen. The whole country was interested in the strike, and it made people think about the unfair treatment of these workers. Finally, after 2 weeks, the strikers won, and French waiters got the right to have a moustache, just like anyone else. Children fought in the US Civil War by the hundreds of thousands. During the US Civil War, a significant number of soldiers were really young, like under 18 years old. More than 100,000 kids who were 15 or younger were in the Union Army alone, and the Confederates had lots of child soldiers too. Some were shockingly as young as 8 years old and were made to wear uniforms. Most of the time, these young soldiers in the US Army did jobs like drumming, blowing bugles, helping cooks, taking care of wounded soldiers and doing other non-fighting tasks. But when battles happened, these child soldiers faced the same dangers as the adults, with bullets and artillery flying around. In the Navy, kids often worked as powder monkeys on warships. Their job during a fight was to quickly carry gunpowder from storage to cannons. Even though they were young, they were just as exposed to danger as the older sailors on the ship. In fact, because they were running around with bags of gunpowder, which could explode if it touched anything hot, they were sometimes even more at risk than the rest of the crew. Emperor Vespasian shuffled off the mortal coil with a joke. Vespasian, the Roman emperor from 9 to 79 AD, was known for being down-to-earth and friendly. He came from a simple background, never acted superior, and had a sharp sense of humor. As emperor, he preferred speaking plainly, avoided unnecessary formality, and had a straightforward way of doing things. One of his ideas to raise money was to put a tax on public urinals, which people found funny and made fun of. His son, who was supposed to take over as emperor, criticized him for this, saying it wasn't dignified for the emperor to collect money from bodily waste. Vespasian had a clever response. He held a coin under his son's nose and asked if he could smell any urine. Then he said, "Money does not smell," turning it into a popular saying in Latin. Vespasian never took himself too seriously, and this attitude stuck with him even at the end of his life. The Chinese general who tricked an enemy into supplying him with arrows, Zhuge Liang, a clever chancellor and military strategist in ancient China's Three Kingdoms period, 181–234, pulled off a brilliant move in 208 during a big standoff near the Yangtze River. Tricked by his rivals, he ended up promising to provide 100,000 arrows in just a few days, a task that seemed impossible. But Zhuge Liang wasn't one to back down. He got a bunch of riverboats, lined them up with wet straw, and explained the plan to the crews. On a foggy night, they quietly rowed across the river, positioning the boats close to the enemy camp. Then, with a signal, they made a ton of noise, shouting, beating drums, and clanging gongs. The startled enemy woke up in a panic, thinking they were under attack. They shot a bunch of arrows at the boats, but because of the wet straw, the arrows got stuck in them. Zhuge Liang's boats, now loaded with over 100,000 captured arrows, sailed away quietly in the confusion. It was a clever move that helped him outsmart his opponents and get what he needed. The British fought the Napoleonic Wars with one of history's crappiest swords. Designing a sword might seem pretty straightforward. After all, people have been making them for thousands of years. Surprisingly, though, the creators of the 1796 British infantry officer's sword, also known as the 1796 Spadroon, somehow managed to mess it up. They came up with a sword that wasn't good at cutting, thrusting, defending, and to top it off, it was poorly made. The first issue was with the hilt, the handle part. It was designed for a thrusting weapon like a rapier, which didn't work well for the cutting and slashing movements needed in a sword. If someone tried to swing it for a cut, the blade was too light and flexible, often bouncing off even from bare skin. The flexibility also made it bad for thrusting because the sword would bend, and the point wasn't as sharp as it should be for piercing. On top of that, the hilt guard meant to protect the hand was a folding clamshell with pins that could easily break upon impact. The thin and weak knuckle bow, the part that sticks out on the hilt, was another problem. It bent easily and could hurt the user's hand. A British general from that time summed it up well. Nothing could be more useless or ridiculous than the old infantry regulation sword. It was good for neither cut nor thrust and was a perfect encumbrance. A Viking leader was killed by a dead enemy. Sigurd Eysteinsson, also known as Sigard the Mighty, was a Viking leader who ruled over the Orkney and Shetland Islands near Scotland. Teaming up with other Viking chiefs, he decided to invade the Scottish mainland and successfully took control of a big chunk of northern Scotland, reaching as far as Moray. His fellow Vikings were so impressed with his actions during this conquest that they nicknamed him the Mighty. During his Scottish campaign, Sigurd faced off against a local leader named Mael Brigta, the Buck-Toothed. They agreed to a fair 40-man per side battle, but Sigurd played dirty. He brought 80 men. The outnumbered Scots were defeated, and Sigurd not only beheaded Mael Brigta, but also tied the poor guy's head to his saddle as a trophy. On the way home to celebrate, the bouncing, severed head accidentally cut Sigurd's leg with male Brigta's bucktooth. The cut got infected, and sadly, Sigurd died from the infection before reaching home. It's a tale of triumph and an unfortunate twist of fate for the mighty Viking leader. Austria-Hungary's chief spy catcher was a spy Alfred Redl, born in 1864, worked his way up in the Austro-Hungarian army to become the head of counterintelligence from 1900 to 1912. His job was to catch spies and traitors, but Redl had a secret. He was gay, and in those times, being gay was a big no-no. Russian spies found out about his secret, caught him in a compromising situation and took pictures. They used these pictures to force Redl into betraying his own country. The Russians even offered him money for giving away important secrets, and Redl agreed. In 1902, he handed over Austria-Hungary's war plans to the Russians. When the Austrians found out the Russians had their secret plans, Redl was assigned to find the traitor. Tricky situation, right? Well, Redl managed to fool everyone by blaming innocent officers and exposing minor Russian agents, all while secretly selling more and more secrets to the Russians for the next 10 years. However, Redl's career hit a snag in 1912. Envelopes stuffed with cash, but nothing else, were intercepted by postal censors. These envelopes had receipts leading back to known addresses used by Russian and French spies. The authorities set up a trap, delivered the envelopes while keeping an eye on them, and Redl fell into the trap when he showed up to claim the cash. Arrested, he admitted to treason, and then took his own life. It was the end of a complicated and betraying story. The bizarre pickpocket. King Farouk I, who ruled Egypt from 1936 to 1952, had a reign filled with problems, corruption, incompetence, and some strange behavior. One odd thing about him was that he was a real thief. He couldn't resist stealing things and picking people's pockets. He even took lessons in pickpocketing, and one of his victims was Winston Churchill. During a dinner in WW2, Churchill realized that his precious pocket watch, a family heirloom, had disappeared. After some commotion, Farouk, who was sitting next to Churchill, awkwardly returned the watch, saying he had found it. The blind king who charged into battle, John of Bohemia, also known as John the Blind, because he lost his eyesight 10 years before he passed away in 1346, was a famous warrior in his time. He had fought all over Europe, from the Mediterranean to the Baltic. When the French king Philip VI asked for help against England, John, despite being blind, went to Paris in August 1346 to assist the French king. Together, they marched off to face the English king. At the Battle of Crécy on August 26, 1346, John led the French vanguard and a significant part of the army. Even though he couldn't see, John wanted to join the fight and ordered his men to tie their horses to his so he could take a swing with his sword and honorably be part of the battle. His knights did as he said, and tied to their horses, John, the blind king, rode into the battle. But things didn't go well. Misjudging the distance, John went too deep into the English ranks, and he and his men got surrounded and overwhelmed. In the chaos that followed, the blind king and his entire group were killed in the fight. Thanks for watching the video, and if you found it informative, please like and subscribe to Time Capsule for similar content. We look forward to sharing more knowledge with you in the future. Until then, take care.